because the army is building.
Welcome back from the commercial break, and we continue the discussion. We want to see a well-built-up Uganda resilient and sustainable economy. At times they talk about the sustainable development goals, and of which some of them that hinges on having a food secure, society where we don't have famine. Famine is one of it, and in most cases these basics. Before, when we are dealing with economies, they are the basics, the human basics. You have medicine, medical care. You have security. You have housing. You have food. You have housing, and clothing. You are able to move forward. But the situation we are in, we're having situations of famine in some of the areas. And by the way, if I was to go the statistics, the percentage of Ugandans who eat a meal per day, 1 meal per day, and the others who are going, hungry, 900, people who have died in the Karamoja sub-region, and also here in this city and some other areas. I was on the burial some time back, and there was a member of parliament, and that was as a minister of finance, and the citizens just rose up in a church and said, "Sir, things are not easy, even you cannot buy soap." The other time, as I come to you, Mr. David, where you are able to answer part of my critical questions, there we shall go, and where maybe it is for other bosses, maybe policymakers, still is okay. But in this way, we would like to know why. This is beyond you, I know, but it is our question of debate, discussion, to respond to the taxation, the current economic crisis, which we call a crisis, especially the skyrocketing of commodities and the foreign exchange, which is, now it is 3,850. So the taxation policy at a time where we are, and we ask ourselves, what should the citizen do, especially to manage? And at the same time, they are the ones who are supposed to be paying. They must pay the tax. They must go and buy these commodities. Expensive commodities. For if you were doing an advisor this time, not an implementer, an advisor, suppose you are devising, what could you think should be done? Some citizens, some commentators have found out that we're saying that maybe they reduce taxes on these essentials. If I'm buying this mineral water, don't charge. You do tax exemption. Is that realistic and reliable?
Well, thank you very much. You talked about debt earlier.
Yes, please.
We are in a home, and every month the head of the home is going to borrow some money. Eventually, you'll find when month in, month out, when they are borrowing, it's a problem. And so there is a plan. And that's why we have what we call the DRMS, the Domestic Revenue Mobilization Strategy, which is addressing some of these issues. One of the things that has come out clearly is that we have very few players. Like I mentioned earlier, we have our tax register has about 2.7 million taxpayers. Now, that is on the 45 million Ugandans. That means that if we look at it critically, 2.5 million people are the ones who are feeding 45 million Ugandans and ensuring that they all get a service. And I know, like she said earlier, that we are largely a young population. So even if we look at them being, the young being, how many, 50, 60%, let's call it 50 of the, let's call it 50.
65%.
Yes, if we bring it down to maybe 25 million are all underage. They're not doing it, they're dependents. Then that means we have another 25. And even if the others are not working, they're unemployed because their unemployment, that issue is there. You'll find we have maybe about 10 million. And when you look at the DRMS, you'll find our statisticians have shown that we have about 10 million, 9 points, round it off to 10 million household incomes. So there are 10 million people who are not on the register. They are not of the 10 million, let's remove these, the ones that we have, the two. So there are about 8 million people who are out there, and they are playing a very big role in our economy. They are doing well. They are thriving. Whichever part I have had a chance to visit, every part of this country, everywhere, there is growth. There is growth. Our president once said that in 86, 87, 88, whenever he would be flying over, he would just see one iron sheet, one dot that is shining. But right now we have the mushroom. There is no town that is not on a pedestal of growth. I don't want to, but the idea is that every town, touch any border station, touch any rural place, there is growth, there is development. But again, we don't see that in our numbers. And of course, you've seen, we talked about the percentage to GDP, it's still low, because we also seeing that trickling down. And yes, she mentioned earlier, we could have concentrated and milked the same cow, meaning that we keep going to the same people. But we've changed that, and we've started going out. We have outreaches. There's something called TREP, where we work with the local government, URSB, for people to formalize. Uganda has been recognized as a very entrepreneurial country. We actually, even in 2016, we led, we were number 1, and I think Turkey came number 2. We were at 37%, while Turkey was at 27%. And these are some research sites. We can Google them. But we have led, even in 2012, we led. So we have people who are doing business.
Allow me to first interject.
Yes.
In terms of export rate, the percentage of our export trade rate is 16%, 17%. You can search it, it's the fact, 16%, meaning that we import over 80, around 83 is of the import trade. And which import trade, what we import, the tax levied on these imports, it's too high for the citizens. Those who could want to buy a good car becomes very difficult, because the kind of the tax you impose upon the purchase of these cars, and these days we say buying a car is a necessity, and it becomes difficult for many people to go for the first-hand cars. They end up buy the second-hand, even of the model of 2000, 1998, and for a short time that is sold off, they bring another. Our standard of living, as you call it, that we are growing, we seem to still, some of us in our analysis, without any kind of bias, to be reserved on it. That's one aspect. Export trade, import trade, meaning what are we producing? How many companies do you have, especially under URA, that are of Ugandan origin, and those which are foreign investors that are contributing to the tax base? And also one asks what the government is doing to rise up more investors, local and foreign, that can make production that will cause this country to find we are producing much. That's why it's not, the blame is not on you, but we are still having a reservation. Number 2, as you said that we are growing, we continue to look at the poverty rate, the scorecard, where we are. Some region, the last one, which is here in the Uganda Central region, it is 35%. People are poor, meaning they cannot have $1 per day. And for some other northern parts of Uganda, 65%, 55%. Then we go to Kigezi, 45%, in Bunyoro, 42%, and they are living under poverty. And even including their standards of living is a bit worrying. We'll be coming back to you, but I would like to first hear from you. Those are some of the worrying questions, and how we can be able to bridge that gap. You're welcome once again, Doctor, as we'll be going back to Mr. Rusoke.
Okay, thank you so much, moderator, Dr. Tindebwa. Those were really very strong questions, but also I don't want to miss what my colleague was trying to onboard. Where we have come from is very critical. It is really good, and I mean, it's important that we are able to remember our journey. But you see, remembering our journey is very important. But then my issue is that if we actually stand at maybe 20 million Ugandans who should ideally be taxpayers, and you find that consistently we still have only 2.7 million Ugandans who are registered. And out of these 2.7 million Ugandans who are registered, we have 1.1 who are actively paying taxes. That's already a gap. I don't want to be very academic, but in research, we would say that is a gap that require in-depth study, in-depth understanding, and in-depth recommendation of real issues and real solutions. But for now, for today, I'll just go on the baseline and I say, how do we, because we are talking about involving citizenry in boosting and stabilizing, strengthening resiliency for self-sustainability as an economy for Uganda. So how do we pull these 20 minus 2.5, let me actually do 1.1, roughly 18.9 million. How do we bring them up onto participating into paying of taxation? The simple issue is that let them be able to generate finances, or let them be able to generate incomes. Unless they generate incomes, they cannot participate. So for me, this is not a URA issue. Now, back on the entire government chain, process chain, or business process chain, I would want to understand who are those boosters? What are their responsibilities in boosting the mandate, the requirements for business sustainability? And I'm glad you were asking, and you went ahead, and even my colleague from URA went ahead to say, in 2012, in 2016, Uganda was the leading entrepreneurial country. What has happened today? But also, interestingly, would it be nice for us to understand, to take track, actually we call those tracer studies, to understand all those enterprises that made us top entrepreneurial country, where did they disappear to? And if we can understand why they disappeared to, of course it's evident they all closed. Why did they close? And what are we doing about this closure? If we sit down in our comfortable zone, 5 years down the road, we'll come back to discuss these poverty rates that you're trying to enhance. I mean, in a whole capital city of Uganda, why would we still be at 35% of poverty rate? And yet everything in the city is actually money. Some time back, one person made a joke and said, in Kampala, if you cough, it's money. If you stand, it is money. If you sit, it is money. So if 35% of a population of roughly 2.5 million Ugandans who are here in Uganda every day are not having a dollar, then what are they doing? They are the increased thieves on the roads. They are the increased robbers on the roads. They are the increased, all these nuisances that we have around. So what we are saying is that how do we bring these people on board? And this is why I don't want to miss the point. Number one issue, I had started already to build on it, is that how do we bring them on board in terms of making them productive? And productivity is not just about skilling. And I like the fact that increasingly there's been this whole thing of we need to skill the youth, we need to skill the youth, we need to skill the youth. But equally, I can assure you that is equally no solution. What the solution actually is to skill on relevancy. What is it that the economy needs, and skill on relevancy? You raised another important issue of saying cars are becoming a necessity. And I mean, it's not the only necessity that the country has. Where are our social protection policies? How vibrant are they? How implementable are they? Who is implementing them? As I was trying to prepare for this discussion this evening, I was looking at a couple of social protection policies in a number of countries. And one of the things that stood out very firm was the issue of functional pensions, functional insurances, functional health care, functional relevant education.
So in that, doctor, what should the citizen do to fit into that cycle?
I'm getting there. So for me, now this is a two-way traffic. This is a two-way traffic. Social protection, as we had talked about last week in terms of the social market economies, if you remember that discussion, whereby you say, if, for example, you are the sole, maybe you're the sole distributor of a certain entity as a business, a certain little percent needs to be set aside for enhancing or boosting the social cycle around you.
Who sets that 1%?
The policymaker.
Then the 1% is to be reserved by who?
It is be reserved by the investor for that particular purpose.
Then also, where are we seeing the citizen coming in?
That's where I'm getting to. So here I am saying that if that percentage is able to be extracted and set aside to say this percentage, maybe 10% of the earning of this particular business must go in to develop the locals around. Now, this is why I go back to raise a couple of examples, and I'll give you a simple, plain example. A long time ago, I used to work on Mukono Road. Every morning, I left Kampala to go to Mukono, and by 6:30, 6:15, I was in Namave Valley. There's this place where they make hair from, a lot of hair, Darling, I think. I don't know if it's called Darling, but I know it's a factory for hair. But in the morning, you'd meet...
Artificial hair.
Yes, the artificial hair. Yeah, it's called hair. So in the morning, I would meet long queues of women carrying children, men, everyone going to that factory. And guess what? They work an entire day and they're earning 1,000. It was upgraded to 2,000. So if all the big farms had...
All day on Sunday.
Yes. And at lunchtime, they'd open and say, step out and buy and get a meal. I don't know if it's still there. I don't know if that is still happening, because that was roughly like 12 years ago. So my question is, if there was an element of us investors, and I'm categorizing myself as an investor because in one way or the other, I also run a small business where I employ people. So if we would use that mandate to say, let us support, and I mean, URA could tag along and say, if there's this element of how you're supporting a revamp back into the economy, then you have these tax credits in your system. I mean, I know it's not your mandate right now, maybe it's not there, but these are some of the propositions that we can actually bring on board to boost involvement in supporting each other in this drive.
I'm going to give a personal experience.
Yes.
I was the station head of Masaka
Yes.
In 2016-17. And at that point, government released a lot of money. I think it was Bonabagagawale or something like that. And there was this big group of youth. Actually, not youth, everyone came. They had to have a team. And we set aside a desk, okay? And they had to be in groups of 5, okay? And get I think they were getting 30 to 40 million for each group of 5. And each was going to walk away with 8 million. And I just Masaka, I think I was, that is about 8 districts. They all came, there were about 10,000 groups that had to get a TIN in order to access those funds. And we registered all of them, okay? And it was happening in every office. What I want to bring out is that government every year has a plan. They really give out these resources without looking at who, where, who is in what party. They really contribute, because I've seen it firsthand. Not only that, whenever, every year, you'll find the government sets aside money for the youth and for those who are interested in business. The other day, 2016.
This is sufficient, really, what the government gives.
What I want to bring out is that government is doing something. You see, there is not doing anything. But are those businesses yielding? If we go back,
That is where I'm headed to, and that's what I was trying to bring up.
And again, you will come back and say, okay, fine, teach. Right now, I know there is a teaching. Before you access funds, you must be taught. And it's coming from some of those exercises that have been held from far. I am not on that side of government, really. But the point is, they are doing something. Maybe what we should be looking at is how can they do it better? What should they do? That's where our contribution should come in. How can they do it in a way that it leads to progress? Because today, when you give a youth 10,000 shillings, what is the first thing?
MBs.
Smartphone. Something else. If a youth gets 100 million, they will first get a hammer. And there's a behavioral, there's a behavior that we also need to look at.
Okay, we'll be coming back.
Other factors.
We'll be coming back to you.
Can I do something?
And 1 minute, just conclude, we'll go for
yes, so I didn't want us to miss that point. I want to borrow the words of a certain Singapore academician. I mean, we all know that Singapore in 1962 was at the same level of economic growth as Uganda today. What made them move? What was that mindset that was transformed for them to move from what they were then to what they are today? Mm-hmm. And this Singapore academician recommends a formula which he calls the MPH. Mm-hmm. M standing for merioricity. Merioricity in this particular case, this is a unique word that we don't always use, but in this particular word, it means looking out for the best. As we are giving out that money, if always we go like, we need...
You first go through the whole of it to give us the
okay. MPH. So we have merioricity. Number 2 is pragmatism. Number 3 is honesty. Mm-hmm. So the first one, and merioricity, is about only looking out for the best. If you want to propel growth, you need to look out for the best. Are the best in our country supported? If they were supported, they would want to propel the best to grow.
Pragmatism, or somebody we know will go to somebody because of time.
Good. Mm-hmm. Pragmatism, we need to look out for practices that actually work. Mm-hmm. So if we have failed over the last couple of years to make that donation of the youth work out, isn't it? What tells us that 10 years down the road it is going to work?
Honesty.
Number 3, honesty. That everything that we are doing as a country, if we are truly to be honest with ourselves, do you think we've actually exhaustively gone beyond what we're supposed to do? Or there are lots of reservations?
That's the best. Let's go for the commercial break. Those who have ears, please hear properly. That's the reality of the matter. And even if it doesn't elaborate more than that, this is a good take home. See you in the next session.